you'd want with her from us?
Ellie's going to read the questions. They're on the slide.
Okay.
Just no, I think the rest is fine. I'm fine.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, I'm gonna let everyone in and then disable the waiting room so people can just join directly. Okay, everyone? Am I a bit blurry? Is that a bit better?
Your background is blurry, but you look fine.
I know, I just have lots of Lizzie and I have lots of names behind me and it just prefer not to have the names behind. So lots of artwork, which is sort of nice to see sometimes, but yeah, I'm a bit worried about the names showing. So yeah, eventually, hopefully this wall will get cleared and I don't have to blur at home. Okay, gonna do it. What time is it? I'm gonna shut the door and then let people in. I just hear the people talking upstairs. Okay, admit all. Hello, everyone who's joining right now. Just so that you're aware, we're going to be recording the initial bit of the event today. So if you don't want to be recorded, please keep your cameras off and keep your microphones off. And if you don't mind being recorded and put on YouTube, then you can definitely show your face. But we're just going to record the initial bit. And Stephen's going to answer some of the pre-submitted questions that people have submitted for today's event. And then we will turn the recording off to allow everyone to speak more freely and to ask your questions without worried about going on YouTube or being recorded or anything like that. So that's what's going to happen today. And I'm just going to give it a few more minutes, I think. We have one more minute before we're officially starting. So we'll wait till 7 and then okay, I think we'll start. Oops. We'll get going now. So first of all, I'm just going to do a brief introductions before we get going. So my name is Dr. Michelle St. Clair. I'm the director of the Engage with DLD project, which is hosting this event today. And I'm just going to introduce the other people who will be joining us. So Ellie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ellie. I'm working on the E-DLD project this year under Michelle as a research assistant.
And then Stephen?
Hi, I'm Stephen Parsons, a speech and language therapist and chair of NAPCLIP and RADL, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and I'll be answering some questions a little bit later.
Jenny?
Hi everyone, I'm part of the board of E-DLD and I'm a speech and language therapist and a professor of psychology at Cambridge University.
And Nikki?
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Botting and I'm a professor at City University and I'm also a co-founder of E-DLD.
Okay, and I should have also said I'm also a senior lecturer in developmental psychology at the University of Bath in my other roles, as well as being part of the Engage with DLD project. So today's event is really fueled by one of our E-DLD members who indicated that it would be really good to have an event to explain what DLD is to friends and family, like wider friends and family, because a lot of family members maybe have not heard of DLD, because we know a lot of the public also has not heard of DLD. So this is just to give a sort of informative event and to have a question and answer session for friends and family of individuals who are affected by DLD. So we're first just going to go through a few bits of information that might help sort of set the scene and give an idea of what DLD is for people who are not in the know, who don't understand exactly what this diagnosis is. So this is going to be part one, just a brief introduction to DLD. And then the part two will be the question and answer, which we're going to start with our pre-submitted questions that many of you have submitted on Padlet before today's session. And that will be led by Stephen answering that. And then we'll have a Q&A with all the E-DLD members. So as well. So the engagement so just to give a broad overview of what DLD is. So developmental language disorder is what's called a neurodevelopmental disorder. And neurodevelopmental disorders basically mean that there's a disorder to do with, now Jenny had a really good way of phrasing this, but it's just a developmental difference in how we develop, and it's mainly due to learning and behavior. And this is something that starts in childhood and continues throughout a person's life, and it also changes as a person develops. So DLD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and it's in the same sort of category of neurodevelopmental disorders as autism and ADHD. And this means that a child or an adult has a persistent difficulty with language. So this is when this is not language delay and it does not resolve, and it affects about 1 in 14 individuals. So that makes it one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders that is out there. And can I ask Jenny or Nikki to have a look at the chat and let me know if there's any questions that we should address as we go along? So just to give a brief definition, a person with DLD will have sort of difficulties in understanding and or producing language. So difficulties understanding, for instance, maybe the teacher's instructions in class, as well as difficulty answering questions, particularly in a fast-paced environment where somebody's asked a question and then asked to have an answer almost immediately. This is often going to be very difficult for an individual with DLD. And this includes both spoken and written language. So people with DLD often have difficulty and dyslexia and dyslexic tendencies as well. So difficulty with written language as well as oral language. Though their difficulties must have sort of a functional impact on the person's life. So this means that their difficulties with language are causing problems in their everyday life. So it's causing an issue somehow with either engaging with education or engaging with employment. And they might benefit for instance, having reasonable adjustments put in place to help them in those domains. And DLD is not, there's no other cause of the language difficulties. So they don't have autism, they don't have hearing loss or global intellectual disability or a genetic syndrome such as Down syndrome. So it differs in that we don't really understand what the reason is for the language difficulties, but there is a difference in their ability to learn, understand, and use language that is different than individuals who do not have language disorder. Now, how does DLD affect a person? So it's often a very hidden disability. So what we've heard time and time again is that it both affects everyone differently. It's very individual in individual's profile. And it's also something that children and people can be good at hiding. So people often try to hide their difficulties with language. For children, it might be that they just are the class clown rather than admitting that they don't understand what is going on in what the teacher is asking them to do. And this is called masking and camouflaging. And there's some recent ongoing research that is looking at masking and camouflaging in children with DLD and adolescents with DLD as well. So people with DLD currently struggle with spoken language and written language, as we talked about, and they also struggle to find the right words to use. So this is often called word finding difficulties. It's sort of the tip of the tongue scenario that you know a word and you're trying to find it, but you just can't find it. Now that affects everyone from time to time, but individuals with DLD, this affects them more frequently than most people. And DLD might also have they might also find listening difficulty and have difficulty with their working memory. So difficulty keeping in mind what somebody has just said. So somebody might be talking to them and they might have said something and then it just suddenly goes. And there's some really great YouTube videos that sort of illustrate this with animations about how sometimes the words are just coming at people like pellets and they're just bouncing off because it's not getting in. So I would encourage people to have a look at, maybe to Google on YouTube, to try to find those videos to get a more coherent explanation than I'm able to give. And also people with DLD are much more likely to have, or more likely, I should say, not much more likely. They're more likely to have social and emotional difficulties, although this is very variable and some people have good social and emotional skills who have DLD. But children with DLD are also more likely to have difficulty with their peers. DLD can affect somebody's success in school and work. And this is something that our group in particular is really starting to focus on, how DLD affects adulthood really, and how in particular how undiagnosed DLD is impacting on people's ability to work and to go to school and so forth. And children with DLD can struggle with paying attention, following instructions, like I've sort of given some illustrations of already. So in terms of diagnosis, there's not sort of a gold standard way to identify DLD. DLD can't be diagnosed through things like brain scans or blood tests. It's diagnosed based on behaviors. So speech and language therapists would usually diagnose through a battery of language tests. And the language test would probably be unique to each individual. So there could be some core tests that a speech language therapist always does, but also they talk to the parents, talk to the children, figure out what their specific profile appears to be, and then maybe change the assessment. And Stephen can maybe talk more about this later to better suit that. Was there a question, Nikki? Okay, sorry. A diagnostician or a speech and language therapist more likely will, sort of what I just said, will look at how a person's life is negatively impacted by their language problems. And this again is through engaging with the person, with the family, looking at the social interactions and how they engage in the school and workplace environments. So it's a combination of language scores and evidence that DLD is impacting on everyday life that will lead to a DLD diagnosis. So it's this impact on everyday life that is important, as well as having demonstratively lower language ability than you would expect for your age. And just, I don't think we mentioned it in the slides, but individuals with DLD often have very normal IQ. So it's not that their IQ is lower and that's accounting for the language difficulties. They are bright, they are intelligent, they are sometimes very bright, but they just have a specific problem with language. And that's sort of leads into why we might not have heard of DLD before, because DLD is not a new disorder. We have known and we've been studying this phenomenon for decades and decades now, but the term DLD is relatively new because we found that we were using so many different terms to describe the same people. So in 2017, the research community and the speech and language community came together and agreed that we should have the name developmental language disorder, or DLD. So we agreed on the name, but DLD was previously known by many other names. So this included specific language impairment, which goes again to the idea that I just talked about, that DLD is a specific issue with language, which is not shared in terms of nonverbal intelligence. Primary language impairment was used, developmental dysphasia, language learning impairment, and all of these terms are sort of brought together under the sort of developmental language disorder umbrella. And DLD was agreed on to make it easier to understand the disorder as well as to help raise awareness. And the label DLD reflects that it's a neurodevelopmental condition. So it's sort of the same as autism spectrum disorder. So we're trying to have some equivalence there with other neurodevelopmental conditions as well. So people with DLD are more likely to have other conditions such as ADHD, dyslexia, as well as other specific learning disabilities, perhaps dyscalculia. And children with DLD are more likely to struggle with anxiety. And that's really what's coming out in a lot of the literature recently. And now a lot of people struggle with, and I think a lot of speech language therapists and other professionals struggle with whether DLD and autism can be diagnosed together. And I know anecdotally from a lot of individuals that one set of professionals might diagnose autism and the other is very adamant that a DLD diagnosis is more appropriate. So officially, DLD and autism are distinct conditions, and a child, to be diagnosed with DLD, a child should not have an autism diagnosis. And this is because autism can explain language difficulties. So autism is often accompanied by a language disorder, but it would be called a language disorder associated with autism. And DLD is diagnosed when there's not another primary cause of language difficulties. And I think one thing to mention is that I think this does, from what I've heard from individual cases, it seems to get muddled as people grow older, and that they might look like they have autism more than they did when they were younger. And I think that is a common phenomenon that can happen with DLD. Now, whether an individual case should be autism or DLD, I don't know, but it's just something to keep in mind. So DLD is not caused by an access to language, which is important to understand. So especially for friends and family and parents and people in this audience, DLD is not caused by a lack of access to language. It's not caused by any individual not providing a child with a rich enough language environment to learn. DLD isn't just a language delay. A person with DLD's language development, it follows a different trajectory. There's specific issues that children with DLD and individuals with DLD have is inherent to the condition, and it's not that they just haven't gotten the right information, they haven't gotten the right environment to be able to learn language normally, and it is not caused by being bilingual. So if a child has DLD, they will have DLD in all languages that they learn. And in fact, the current recommendation is that if a child is growing up in a bilingual environment and they have DLD, they should still grow up in a bilingual environment. They should still be exposed to both languages or all languages that are in the environment. So you shouldn't use DLD as a reason to restrict a child to just a single language. So the causes of DLD. So there's no known cause of DLD. There's a lot of different things that we know is often factors in DLD, but genetic factors may play a role in DLD. So there's a family risk of DLD. So if your parent or sibling has DLD, you might be at increased risk of having DLD, or the offspring of so if your parent, your children might be more likely to have DLD. And this is because some genes are believed to increase the risk of DLD, and these same genes has been associated with general language abilities and general memory abilities as well, or specific memory abilities. So these are sort of some of the things that we know. So it is a hereditary disease, it is a genetic disease, but it doesn't mean that it can't occur sort of de novo. It can occur in individuals without a family history as well. So, and how can I support somebody with DLD? So there's a lot of different things you can do. So I think what's not on this slide is, I think, just a general thing of giving people time. So not expecting an answer immediately, giving them time and space to if you ask them a question, to think about the question, and then to be able to formulate the response. I think that's important. Children can also greatly benefit from speech and language therapy, and oral language or vocabulary interventions can be an effective way to improve children's language skills. And I think we've already planned a next session, an engagement event in May. I believe we're going to schedule it at some point in May about what parents and people can do in the home to help support their child with DLD. So that is something that we will, so this question of how to support somebody with DLD is something that we'll be going into in our next online event as well. So the part 2, I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to hand over to Stephen Parsons, which to discuss some of the submitted questions that have already happened. So I'm going to stop sharing now and then let Stephen take over and share. But is there any questions before we move on? Any questions?
There's been lots of activity in the chat, Michelle.
Yeah,
So we're sort of answering some of them as we go.
So shall I just hand over to Stephen then? And yeah, okay. I will stop sharing and then let Stephen share.
I must say I've been enjoying the chat. There's been really, really great questions, and I hope I'll address some of them because I'll be answering. Well, I've got pre-planned answers, I guess, to the ones that were submitted before this evening. But hopefully we'll have some time to answer some more, and and I'll probably pick up some of the themes that come up from the questions as well. So yeah, I'll just share my slides first of all. So from beginning. So hello, so I'm Stephen Parsons, and I'm a speech and language therapist, and have been for many years, and worked for many years with children and young people with DLD. Before it was called DLD mainly. Anyway, and I'm also now chair of NAPLIC, which is a UK organisation for professionals who work with children and young people with DLD. So that's teachers and speech and language therapists mainly. And then also I'm chair of RADLD, which is the Raising Awareness of DLD campaign, the international campaign as well. So lots of time. I spend a lot of time thinking about DLD and talking to people about DLD. And I've thank you to everyone who's put where they're from in the chat, because actually that really helps, because so we've got Canadians, Americans, quite a number of British. I think they're all English. I think I haven't noticed anyone from Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. I haven't noticed, but anyway, but it's quite, we've got quite a range of people, and I'm aware that some of the questions, I don't know where the kind of questions have come from, but I'm guessing some of them where they've come from because of terminology. But I will try and watch myself in terms of any jargon that I use and explain any kind of system kind of issues that might be relevant, and also any jargon that I might use. But please, I'll ask Nikki to interrupt if I use it, if anyone puts into chat anything that I need pulling up on. But please do just put it into chat straight away. All right, so over to who's going to ask the questions. We're going to do questions and answers, aren't we? Is it Ellie?
Somebody from Wales. I just need to announce that there is somebody here from Wales, so not just England. Thank you for.
Yeah, I'll read the questions for you, Stephen.
Yeah.
So the first question was, does the NHS diagnose DLD? What support should be offered? I'm presuming a child or young person asked this. Whoops.
That was me, sorry. And I've put all the information on slides, partly because otherwise it's just a lot of talking, listening to me talking, but also so I don't miss anything from my thoughts. Okay, so the answer to the first question is basically, in a word, yes. So when the changes, the terminology first came in, there was some concern that there would be some kind of systemic resistance to it, and so some managers would say, no, you can't diagnose DLD. So in 2019, I think it was, we did a survey and didn't find that. Okay, but what we did find is that some services were very organized and had policies and processes, and some did not. Some were very disorganized and left it up to individual practitioners on their own, which is never a good way to go forward in, right? So I mean, I'm expecting things to move forward a little with practice generally, but there will still be patches, right? That's I think with the issue of a national system. Sorry, we should explain to non-British people, the National Health Service is the UK-wide organisation for health. It's a public free to access service. First terminology slip up, sorry. And what we are very aware of is there's a huge variation in skills and confidence. So some practitioners have really are routinely diagnosing DLD, and then there are many others who are not. And we're working very hard on building up that capacity over time. Other issues are related to things like caseloads, and to make a diagnosis of DLD is not an easy decision to do lightly. It takes time. And so there's huge time pressures. 23% of all children, young people services, speech language therapy posts in the UK in England are currently vacant, right? So massive vacancy rates then creates pressures in other sources. So the hurdles are huge, but we are kind of trying to shepherd in the right direction. And then in terms of support, okay, I mean, some of the same issues addressed. Ideally, we should be a needs-based service, and so therefore we should be able to provide support. And we're a long way from where we need to be in terms of the actual amount of support. In many cases, it's almost nothing, right? So a lot of services are facing lots of cuts, like local authority cuts as well. So they're cutting back to all non-statutory work, so they're only providing what they really have to. So that's causing lots of issues as well. So I'm sure that's happening in other countries, not just the UK, right? There's lots of issues. But this question actually made me think, what can we realistically do that provides that doesn't require huge, sort of like huge amounts of resource? And I think something like diagnosis, right, and then really understanding this is what DLD looks like for this child or young person, and this is how it is impacting on their life and their learning, is really crucial, because that is really important for identity. So the young person knows, what things they're good at, what things they find difficult, and then we start to think about, okay, what strategies, what changes can we make? And I think that's really an important step, and particularly around impacting on mental health. But then actually the actual specific intervention that speech language therapy should be providing to develop certain skills. So, working with a child and young person, thinking these are the skills we want to develop, how are we going to develop those? But also around transition points, ensuring that children don't get lost. So when they move from, say, primary to secondary, is actually those strategies and skills and knowledge transfer with them. And a big part of that is training for schools as well, and advocacy. So schools developing systems. A long hope is that DLD is very common, right? So if we are diagnosing on the scale that we need to be diagnosing, the numbers coming through the system will force schools to develop their own systems, because there will be so many of them, right? They will just have to have these systems in place, and they'll develop skills because they'll have to do that. So that's my hope. So, okay, that was question 1.
So the second question is about phonological speech language delay, or DLD. This person's not sure they understand the difference between phonological speech and language delay and DLD. Is there an age at which phonological speech delay becomes DLD?
Okay, and I've got several slides to answer this question, just so to make it a little bit clearer. So phonology can often be, you can say it's speech, okay, just for our purposes today. And speech refers to the speech sounds that we actually hear when someone talks to us. So what actually, if you say cup, you can hear the sounds k, up, right? Those 3 sounds. Or for cake, you can hear k, ache. Okay, so you can hear those sounds. Whereas language is the words of sentences, or vocabulary and the sentences, and then how they're used. And obviously it can also be understanding the words and sentences as they come in, but also expressing ourselves, expressing our thoughts through words and sentences. And language is spoken or written or sign, right? So like British Sign Language is a language as well. Okay, so that's the difference between speech and language, or I guess phonology and language. And then if we look at DLD, so I find this chart very useful. It's very purple and bright, I know, but it is. But this is DLD sort of broken into areas, the areas of language. And don't worry too much about all the little bubbles around the outside, just focus on the ones on the inside. Okay, so we've got speech sounds. Speech is one of these, phonology is one of these, okay? And then we've got other areas of language. So phonology can be part of part of the areas which is impacted upon by DLD alongside other language areas. And just so quickly, because you've got words and sentences, and then how to use them as the social and discourse, the telling stories, okay, is those things there, and learning and memory is part of the understanding of language as well. Okay, so they're the kind of key areas, but speech phonology can be part of it. So going back to the question, what makes it a little bit tricky is with young children. So if a young child who has some speech phonological delay, and differentiating that from DLD, they might be saying very little, and so therefore it might be very unclear. So it's actually hard to work out, is it the speech sound issue, or is it the language issue that's causing the communication difference? That can be a little bit tricky at that age. But and for DLD, we don't. The recommendations has to language need has to continue past 5, but we can diagnose it under that if it's likely to continue. But the big difference would be it relates to understanding. So we would be able to tell even in a young child if they had difficulties with understanding language, because a phonological delay wouldn't present itself as any difficulties with understanding where DLD might. So that's just I guess to think about that. Hopefully, not knowing who I'm talking to, who's asked the question is really hard. Hopefully I've asked that question. For professionals, we discourage the use of the word delay. All right, it's one of the things that is because a delay sends a signal to families and to children and young people that it's about catching up. And actually DLD is a difference, not about catching up, right? It's about learning language in a different way. So that's just really for professionals, please don't use DLD, don't use delay. If anyone else on the team here wants to chip in, then please do as well.
You're quite quiet, Stephen. That's my only comment. I don't know whether it's just me.
I'm quiet, am I?
Yeah, for me you are. I don't know if just me, but
no, I don't know how to do that once I'm going.
oh, don't worry.
Without interrupting.
We can hear you.
Okay, I'll sit as close to as the microphone as I can then. Okay, so next question. Sorry, Ellie, sorry.
So the next question is, are there any resources I can use to explain DLD to my family?
Great. So it really depends on obviously family dynamics and I guess the type of person that you're talking about DLD to, whether they're people who want to know lots of information or not. But some ways I find this very useful, all right, to actually talk through the areas of language. It's written in very simple terms, and you can also tailor it quite specifically to a person with DLD. So actually, which areas do they find more difficult, which finds less difficult, right? So there's lots of flexibility with that, and that's available from Raddle. From Raddle, the website in the I have to think it's in the resources page there. There's also this resource which comes from DLD and Me, and there's the link there. I mean, it's designed to be talking with teachers about DLD, and it's again another checklist, but it's designed for children, to empower children to talk to their teachers, but it can be used just as well with family members. It's very jargon free as well, so it's quite a useful one there. But I think, and the other resource is really is some videos from Raddle. There's loads of videos on the Raddle YouTube channel. I particularly like the one by Lily Farrington. So if you just Google Lily Farrington Raddled, it comes up. So Lily is a young woman with DLD, and she made it as a project spontaneously a number of years ago. And it's really clear, and it really explains it really well. And that's also from a personal perspective. So I think it has some real weight as well. But I guess just really developing, not just talking about DLD in the abstract, but how it actually affects your child. So what things does it impact? What things do they find easy to do? What things do they struggle with? And then I guess importantly, it's really about what someone can do to help. And it doesn't need to be anything, like crucial, like, it can be something practical, and just the relationship, because, you know, DLD is about communication, so it can make relationships more difficult, particularly if they're more verbal. So if your family is very verbal, then it might be about coaching them in not saying so much, doing something that is less verbal, right? Playing a game or a board game, even if it's an older young person. So, you know, or just something very simple where there's a lot less language, but still is there something they can do together. And you know, and the wider family relationships are really important for self-esteem, isn't it? For developing an awareness of self and having strong relationships as well. So I guess, yes, whilst it's important that families understand DLD, I'd also really think about the relationship in particular as key for that.
So the next question is from someone who says that their son was recently diagnosed with DLD in February, just before his 13th birthday. He hadn't struggled with language delay as an infant, but it's been explained to the parent that he's spent many years masking his struggles. He has a particular love of sport, which has been a great coping mechanism for him. And the parent would like to know, has there been any research as to the cause of DLD?
Great. So I've pulled out a few themes out of this one as well, because I think it's got some other points that are useful to note as well. So it's interesting that your son was first identified when he was 13. So, and it's probably a lot to do with moving to secondary school, is that we know that there's a big jump in the demands for language when young people move from primary, so elementary school to secondary or high school, is because of the curriculum expands, the number of words expand, the amount of teaching talk expands. And there isn't, where in primary or elementary school, we have, you know, children have one teacher largely who is very familiar with them, and so it's much more sort of care, sort of more, I guess, a more kind of caring kind of holistic view. And in secondary school, it's much more about the curriculum, the learning just being pumped out, and the students being expected to take it in, right? So that's where often there's that mismatch there. And then there's, I guess, about the masking, right? And masking, which is interesting. Michelle and I didn't liaise about the slides beforehand, both raised here, because masking can be good or it can be bad, right? So masking is a way of coping, isn't it? Actually developing coping mechanisms, and they can be positive. And I guess what is, when they can be negative, is when they're young people are feeling bad about themselves, right? And actually they're bottling things up and they're not talking to anybody about them. And so they just develop a very negative self-concept, right? So really, yeah, just to be, I think, be watchful of that, you know, having a safe place, a safe time to be able to talk and express how the day has gone is really important. I'm very pleased that your son's got an interest in sport, and having interests outside of school are really important for young people, and particularly something like a club or something where there's some sort of predictability to the sport, right? So it actually has a kind of supported way of interacting with peers, and particularly if coaches are aware of any needs as well. I saw an interview with a swimming coach a while ago, actually, and it was around autism, but actually was saying that the coach had changed their style because they had this student with autism, who actually is actually competing at like a international level, and they were more showing, and actually the others in the coaching group had improved as well, because actually showing works better than telling someone to do something, right? And that's exactly the same for DLD, is showing is much better than being spoken to. Michelle's already addressed about the cause, is families do not cause DLD. And I think that's a really strong message to get out there, because the message in the media is generally that, oh, children don't talk because their families don't talk to them, they're on their phones all the time, right? yes, the environment and the language that children are exposed to is important, but that doesn't cause DLD. This is something about how the brain is developing, so that neurodevelopmental, right? How the brain develops. And Michelle's already mentioned about and knows far more than me about the causes of DLD. So we're hoping, I think I'm looking at the engaged DLD people here, that actually in the next few years there's likely to be more advances in genetic generally, because of the whole science is developing now in ways that it hasn't done 20 years ago or something like that. But it's not simple, right? It's not a simple thing. It won't be. It's a long way from there's one cause, but because there's no one gene, there's nothing like a blood test or anything like that. And I think then, I guess this flip side of that is that really that doesn't mean because there's no cure, it doesn't mean we can't do anything. Okay, because actually language can be learned, right? So we can teach language, and DLD is about not seeing patterns in language or picking them up as quickly. And actually, if we can make the rules of language more explicit, to actually teach them, then actually people with DLD can learn language. And then also it's about what we do, what everyone else does to support, which makes the difference as well. And I'm just going to put on that little example about vocabulary. And it might be that say, when your son's a young adult, he doesn't have as big a vocabulary as others. But what he needs is the vocabulary that allows him to follow his interests and to do his job and to learn, right? So he can learn that vocabulary. We can teach those, and he can learn those words, but maybe not. We can't teach all the words that other peers might have, right? So, but that doesn't mean he's not going to have a great life. That doesn't mean he's not going to have opportunities. Just it means we have to find a different way there. Okay.
So the next question says that my school-age child greatly struggles with literacy and speech language. They have a formal diagnosis of DLD. How can they get the school to understand the child's needs speech language therapy services? How do they effectively advocate for that? Even with the diagnosis, the school division has told the parent that there is no funding and that the health system only helps those under school age. For reference, this person's in Canada. They feel the division doesn't completely understand what DLD is and the impacts that DLD has on language in school. They want to know if there are any options to pay private.
So I only saw this question yesterday, and I'd written an answer, and then I emailed my contact in Canada, who just responded about an hour or two ago. So I can give you my general response, and then I'll give you my colleague's response as well. So I was a speech language therapist and a manager of a service for many years, and so I dealt a lot with schools and with families and where there's a difference of opinion, and I'd often be the picky in the middle, thinking they're not being unreasonable, they're being unreasonable, and trying to come to some kind of negotiated middle. So one of the key things is to maintain a relationship with the school. Schools get into defensive, I'm talking from my experience, schools get into defensive positions very quickly, right? With parents coming in and saying, I want this. They say, no, we can't do that because we don't do that for all the rest, right? And particularly where there's money, they will get into it. So go in, you have to kind of be in with a very nice kind of, even though you are extremely angry with them and frustrated with them, is practice saying things like, let's work together and focus on moving forward, right? So really trying to not blame anyone, because that will just push them further back, but just keeping it as positive. And if money is the issue, you've got to kind of push that aside and say, I'm not asking for more money. What I'm asking is a different way to do things. All right. So here's just some ideas. One is that they understand about DLD, right? There's loads of courses, online resources available. They can ring up a speech pathologist. They can contact universities. There'll be lots of local services as well as online things. But I guess understanding your child's profile, this is, the school will understand that more. They understand the impact of learning. But then there's things like pre-teaching vocabulary, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And then working with the schools, like if the class book, so there's a class book, if your child can access that but needs a little bit of support, then something like rereading the class book around about in the same time window, either before or after, will help your child to understand it more. But if teachers can be thinking all the time about using multisensory, so DLD is about difficulties with understanding language, so we have to get the meaning in there some other way. Okay, so we can use objects, so real things, or images, or diagrams. So all of those things will help get information to support language. And then I think also supporting friendships generally. So if there's any difficulties with relationships, then teachers can support those easy, just keeping an eye out and providing particular support. And I think a really key one is, particularly for the teacher, is to understand how hard it is every day being in a classroom where there's language all day, and the effort it requires to just keep up. And if the teacher understands that, then that makes an absolute huge difference, and it just acknowledges that. And then I think homework differentiation, homework can be very challenging if it's at the wrong level. So either not doing the same homework at all, or having it broken down into much smaller steps. And then I think things like keeping a record of what works. So really positive. This really supported my child. Let's keep doing this. But that kind of thing is a very positive way of saying, come on, keep going, right? So that's just that. So these are like, these things don't take any money. They just take a little bit of a rethinking. Same question, so you don't need to read it out, Ellie. Okay. And this is from my colleague, Chantel, what's her surname? Maya Crittenden, who is from Ontario. So I'll just read this. This is from Ontario. Okay, so it might, and I know Canadian state systems are very different from each other, aren't they? So with a formal diagnosis of DLD, the school should be able to identify your child using the ministry-approved language impairment classification. This works in Ontario, but she thinks other provinces have a similar classification. Okay, please note that this process will involve formal identification. So presumably that's done by the speech and language therapist from the state. According to the ministerial classification system, all schools are mandated to offer services for formally identified children. However, direct therapy is commonly provided up to grade 2 in many schools, and from grade 3 or 4 onwards, schools often prefer a consultation method, or model. And then obviously then there's likely to be potentially private. So Chantal did say if you have further queries, then she can find out a little bit more on your behalf if it's a different state as well, province. Okay, hopefully that answered that question.
So then the next question is about DLD learning strategies for their DLD child. So this is someone whose daughter's in reception, they're 4 or 5 years old, and she's been diagnosed with DLD early. She has SLT support for her DLD, but the parent would like to know what they should expect for how she learns phonics for reading and writing. What's the best practice for the teachers to do to support her with this?
I'm going to start off saying this is very general advice, okay? Because I think what it really needs is the speech language therapist who's already supporting your daughter to really think specifically how answer this question really. Because some children with DLD have no difficulty with phonics. They take to it, they love it, right? They do it really easily. Many others find it really difficult. All right, so that relates to part of that profile, going back to that rattled the purple bubble one, right? So that really varies. That's the area that probably varies the most, I would think. So what would be interesting is or useful, I guess what I need to do is for the speech and language therapist and the teacher to really sit down together, maybe with yourself as well, and you think, okay, this is the profile of your daughter, and so this is the demands of the teaching process. So actually it's because there's things like the terminology that's used in phonics. Is your daughter able to understand what those words mean so she can actually do the task? So something like the first sound of the word, does she know what first means? Right? Because if she doesn't know what that means, how can you listen out for the first sound if you don't know what that means? Right? So really those things. If she does have difficulties just generally with phonics, then actually being aware, developing some kind of listening skills, so actually being able to hear the sound differences would be part of a useful approach. But then also any kind of extra senses, so multisensory just means using other senses. So could it be done as actually with letters, like physically blending rather than watching somebody or listening to it actually use the letters to blend them together, is one way. And then things like overlearning, so doing things again, simple things, small things that have lots of success. And obviously if there's small group support for that, all the better. So there's like a teacher or teaching assistant doing those tasks as well. But to keep a very close eye on tracking progress, not waiting until your daughter isn't able to do it at the end of the year, but actually keep monitoring progress really regularly. Okay, next one.
So the next question was, what are some strategies that we can do at home to support our child's speech, language, and literacy?
So I don't know the age, I guess here. So these are very general. These are general things. And I've focused more probably on the literacy side a little bit, but any of these will be useful. So I think the key thing is enjoyment, enjoy language, right? So really try and have a little bit of fun, no pressure, don't make it a task, and things like, oh, that's a funny word, I like the sound of that word. I have to, that kind of general comment, right? Just make it a little bit of enjoyment, right? I think that's really important. For reading is, even if your child can decode, so they're good with phonics, is keep reading to them. Okay? And read probably for a longer period. They're much older than other children might be, I think, because actually that will help with language. And it's often a good idea. Young children love it, don't they? Is reading the book over and over and over and over. That really is useful for children with DLD, right? Because they pick up more, they pick up the sentences, right? Through hearing things over and over again. Anything is multisensory. I've said this word a lot of times. So lots of senses, right? So particularly vision, being able to see things and touch things, and real experiences where possible. Okay, so those are things that really help. And if you're doing, say, I mean, like even say like just going out on a trip on the, or a visit on the weekend or something like that, is take some photographs, right, and come back and talk about them and use those photographs then to talk to other people. Another thing is just saying, I don't understand. If you're listening to something or watching something on TV or something, oh, I don't understand that. What does that mean? All right, so really, because that's a really useful habit for all people, but people with DLD in particular is a really useful strategy. Other things to do if you're doing some reading is just at the end, just choose a word and act it out. Okay, have a little bit of fun, particularly obviously a verb, an action word. Other things to do, little YouTube videos, there's lots of little animations or something, and then do a little role play, stop it, and think about what's happened next. Could retell the story using props, using little toys or fingers or something like that, or drawing and writing about them as well, whichever level of literacy your child is at. So the class book, let's talk about this a little bit earlier. So there's the book that teachers will read to the class, is a great source of language as well, but will often be quite sophisticated language. So any way you can support that. So reading it at the same time, or having some kind of summary. There might be a film or something that goes with it, that might be useful as well. In secondary, it might be something as simple as just learning about the theme. So if it was, say, a historical novel, then actually understanding more about that era in history, so that actually the vocabulary and the kind of feel of the book is also has something more background to go onto as well. And I think it really important is just to celebrate, right? Again, as I come back to this again, is we don't know how hard it is. I think none of us who have, you know, language that comes naturally can understand how hard it is at school. Right? It is really, really challenging to sit in a room being bombarded every single day. So I think that's really important just to acknowledge that. Okay, next one. We're almost there, I think. Got a couple more to go.
So this question asks, my child really struggles to learn vocabulary. How can we support her? They say she especially struggles with her school unit and theme vocabulary. The parents heard about giving context, background info is good, but they're unsure how best to do this.
Okay, so vocabulary is my kind of pet topic. So I've written widely about vocabulary, and this is the framework we use for teaching, which comes from someone else, but I won't bombard you with that. But anyway, is select, teach, activate, review, which is STAR. Okay, so these steps and applies across any age group as well, but very quickly is selecting important words and just a very small number. We would teach, if you're teaching something at home, teach one at a time, right? And make sure it's a really useful word that your is it child? I mean, yeah, her daughter is going to come up again. Okay, that they're going to, and word that she's likely to use. So teaching repetition. When I say that is hearing the word lots and lots of times. All right, so that's what really I've got down here. Model rather than questions. Focus on talking to your daughter about the word rather than questioning her. All right, so she's hearing the word lots and lots of times, but also just encourage her to say it, write it. Simple definition, really simple words. Think if you can think about word parts, so prefixes, suffixes, and root words, and then talk about how you use it. Okay, that's some of the context bit, is how do you use the word? When would you use the word? Where might you find the word? Those kind of things. The activate, that's which a child takes their kind of the beginning of their understanding and really makes it meaningful for them. So this is about things like you might draw some drawings or look for examples, even do some Googling online and find images of the same thing or something like that and collect them together. And then think about, this is an example of carbohydrate, okay, bread, pasta, rice, and here's a non-examples. Here's some things which are not carbohydrate. We've got meat, vegetables, okay, and then you could even have a discussion, depends on how old your daughter is and her language, is why is this thing a carbohydrate and why isn't this one a carbohydrate? Okay. And then the review part is just having some way of coming back to the words from time to time. So have a little book or something and just come back to them from time to time. Ideally, all of this should happen in school, right? And linked to what's happening in school. So actually that is then really working together. There are some free resources on the NAPLIC website. It is naplic.org.uk/PTV, which is pre-teaching vocabulary. That was developed by our friend, the late Pip St. John. And that really worked. It really works really well. But just general things of vocabulary, something like the Dorling Kindersley books, which are very visual. They're just like really high quality images. And if you're just looking at, say, a theme, if the theme is on, you know, animals or something like that, then there'll be a book about animals. I mean, they're widely available in libraries as well. So they're really worth looking at because they're very visual, engaging kind of books, but have will provide lots of the background kind of information as well. Okay. I think two more, I think.
I think I'm just going to interrupt. So I think we have about 5 minutes, probably
Okay.
less than that now, on our allotted time, but we often run over. But we do have about 5 minutes before we hit 8 o'clock, when I think we said it would go from 7 to 8, but I think many of us might be willing to stay a bit longer than that. But I don't know about you, Stephen, so I just wanted to let you know that we're coming to the end of our hour slot. But we do want to do that.
Should I do the question?
Yeah.
Great. So this is someone who said they have a DLD student who has low working memory, but their verbal comprehension is fine. Are they able to handle a home audiobook plus a class novel study? Or is it better to focus on one oral story at a time?
Sorry. And I suspect this is not from a parent. I suspect this is from a professional. Is it the student bit and the terminology used? But anyway, my thought would be to try it and see what happens. I think because it's really important is what does the young person want to do? Do they want to just study the class book, or actually do they want to listen to other books that they like as well? All right, that would probably in many ways would be the overriding question to answer. Really, so it's finding that balance between enjoyment and learning. But you could again listen to that could work as listening to the class novel again potentially, but also focusing on, I guess, the working memory is having some kind of recording. Remember those sort of strategies where the story's up to. Okay, so really having some kind of keeping track so it can build on it for the next chapter. Okay, this is the big question I've kept to the end.
So the final question was asking about a homeschooling curriculum for a 12-year-old with DLD.
I have to say I don't know. It's probably the honest answer is kind of really and I'm not aware, and obviously I don't know your child and all the context really much at all. But so this is very kind of general. But I would be thinking there aren't sort of off the shelf kind of curriculum, right, specifically for DLD. But thinking very generally, okay, thinking first of all holistically, the whole child, thinking social, mental health, as well as the language and learning things. Being really aware of your daughter's profile and preferences, so what she's good at, what she finds difficult, and what she likes to do. Looking at those multi-sensory experiences, thinking visual and hands-on as well. And then, this example of that is shape coding, which is a specific evidence-based intervention or support for learning language, and particularly for sentence formation and grammar. And so it works very visually, right? So that's a system, but using the same kind of strategies is making things that are hard for people with DLD generally to pick up, making them explicit and making them visual, multisensory is what works. But also work on independence so that your daughter's able to do things and develop independence, having some kind of structure to a task. So this step, then finish. And that develops a sense of achievement, right? So that's really those things are important. But I guess also, don't make it all work, have enjoyment, have fun. And I think really have opportunities to follow interests, and social opportunities are really important as well. I do think about a new speech and language therapist who's able to offer that specific advice, because nothing can beat specific advice. All right, and that is the end of my formal slides. At 8 o'clock. Michelle, you're on mute.
Sorry. Had to happen sometime. So I was just going to say, I'm going to stop the recording. And Stephen, are you able to stick around for a few more minutes?
No problem.